Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. One of the decisions that you've got to make going into next season if you're going to plant corn is what traits are you going to use? We're going to talk about different BTs that could be used for above ground pests and also talk about what are you giving up if you go to conventional corn.
We're also going to discuss the micronutrient that many farmers actually do apply in corn. It's zinc. But are you applying enough? Should you be applying some to your soybeans as well? We'll talk about zinc on today's show.
Well, nutrients are great, Brian, but they aren't going to stop our weed of the week. We'll share some of the things that could stop our weed of the week later in the show. But first, here's our farm basics.
Your soybeans are in the bin, but the game isn't over yet. Score more points this year by taking your beans to the end zone. At $10 beans, every point of moisture below your target takes away 15 cents per bushel. Reclaim that lost yield with the end zone bin system from Farm Shop MFG.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk a little about soil erosion. Usually we discuss wind and rain when it comes to soil erosion because that's typically the way that most soil can leave a field or erode off the field.
When you think about all the soil that's out in a field, the most valuable soil is in that top inch or two. The reason why is that's where the most nutrients are at. That's where the most microbiology is happening out in our field because oxygen levels are high there. There's just so much good stuff in that top inch or two.
The most organic matter, yeah, lots of great stuff.
So that's what we don't want to lose as farmers. We want to make sure we protect it. So here we are standing in a field that's been harvested now that was corn, and you notice all the corn stalks are out there. Well, part of the purpose of leaving those corn stalks alone is to try to protect the soil from wind and from rain.
So years ago, there used to be lots of soil erosion on farms across the country and really, quite frankly, around the world. And the reason why is because farmers had to do tillage in order to control bugs, to control weeds, to control diseases, and also to leave a great seed bed. Well, today we have pesticides. Many are very safe pesticides, in fact, to kill those weeds, insects, and diseases. And also, we have much better equipment today. So now on our farm and others around the world, we can do no-till. We could even do strip-till, something like that. And we can have a great seed bed. We can have a good stand. You never used to be able to do that.
One other practice that I know growing up in kind of some hilly farm ground where we farm, that we would see many farmers doing is farming crossways on the hills rather than straight up and down the hills. You think about it, farming with corn and soybeans is done in rows. Well, if you have rows going straight up the hill, when the rain comes, it's going to run straight down the hill and wash out a trench in between those rows. But if we put the rows crossways on the hill, now all of a sudden rain is going to hit a row and stop. Then it's going to get to go a few more inches and hit another row and stop and so forth. And it takes a lot of that momentum out and it greatly reduces erosion potential.
So when you farm across the hill, that's called farming on the contour. Also, there have been terraces put in where basically we make a little dike out in the field to stop water from running down. There certainly are a lot of practices that farmers have done to reduce erosion. And we haven't even mentioned drain tile. Drain tile is one of the best things that a farmer can do other than going to complete no-till.
Well, it forces the water to move down through the soil instead of running off on the surface. And that's a great thing. That's really the way the whole system was designed. That's what soil is supposed to do. It's supposed to filter water out and let it move down through. So when you get those big rains, if you've got drain tile out in a field, it's already allowed the excess water to get away. So now that soil is like a sponge. It can fill back up again with that big rain as it comes.
Studies have shown that tiling reduces erosion by 40 to 60%. Again, that's second only to going to very reduced tillage in terms of how best to reduce erosion out in a field.
And one other practice that farmers often do, especially in hilly ground like this, is leave grass waterways. So through the valley, farmers will leave a strip of grass growing. That way when water does run off the hills, it can run through that grass without taking soil with it.
Well, unfortunately, anywhere in the field you may find our Weed of the Week. Might hold the erosion down, but it's certainly not going to help yield. So we'll talk about how to control this tough weed later in the show.
Across the country and across county lines, no two operations are alike. You make the right decisions for the right acres, and no decision is more important than what you choose to plant. Introducing Extend Flex soybeans. Elite genetics, now with the addition of glufosinate tolerance, giving you the yield you want with the choice you need. Extend Flex soybeans.
Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whenever you want. In your life and on your farm, Case IH AFS Connect gives you more control. Monitor your operation, manage your fleet and your farm data your way. Case IH, rethink productivity.
Pentair Hypro 3D nozzles are your premier choice for fungicide applications. Syngenta fungicide application field trials have shown Hypro 3D nozzles provide a yield advantage of up to 10% over other nozzles, maximizing the return on your fungicide investment. Learn more at pentair.com/hypro.
When you apply phosphate fertilizer, it binds to calcium in the soil, becoming calcium phosphate, essentially tooth enamel. How much of this tooth do you think will become available to your crop? NutriCharge doubles your phosphate availability by protecting it from calcium fixation.
I don't so much worry about how much I spend, I worry about the return on my investment. I've tried so many things to try to be better and try to increase profitability, and I finally felt like I hit a home run. The Soil Warrior has enabled me to decrease hours on tractors by running 2 trips in 1 pass at high speeds, and my fuel savings has been tremendous.
Zinc is a very important nutrient for all crops. So today we're going to talk a little about soil tests, application, and when it comes to what does zinc actually do in the plant, it's got a lot of different functions, but the one that is top of mind for me right now at this time of year and early in the spring is frost protection. If you have better levels of zinc in the plant, you have a plant that's just a little bit more frost tolerant.
First of all, what levels of zinc do you need out in your field? Well, I would look at soil tests as a great way to start this process. Taking good soil tests and including micronutrients such as zinc is very important. Make sure you're getting a complete soil test done. That way we know what's going on out there, because as you're going to hear in just a second, we do compare zinc levels to other nutrients such as phosphorus, and we'd like to see where those ratios are at.
All right, so really what we're typically shooting for, now this all depends on your soil test. So I'll just talk about our soil test we're using, which is Midwest Labs, and I'll go either the Olson test, which is in high pH soil, or the P1 or Week-Bray test. We're usually looking for a 10-to-1 ratio. So if I've got, let's say, 50 parts per million of available phosphorus, I'd like to have 5 parts per million of available zinc. If you don't have that, you get that ratio out of whack. We want to be somewhere in that 8-to-1, 10-to-1 kind of ratio. Let's say we're in the 4-to-1 ratio, or maybe we're 20-to-1 or 30-to-1. What happens is our yields start going down, especially in corn. But zinc is very important in soybeans, in wheat, in any crop that's out there. It's just that corn typically takes the most.
Well, and that's where farmers are applying zinc, and maybe it's the same thing on your farm. You're going out there with a quart of zinc, throwing it in the furrow, and you say, well, I got my needs met for this corn crop. And if you're raising 200 bushel corn or less, and you're able to extract 100% of that zinc and get it into your crop, you're about right. That's what that crop needs. It needs about 0.2 of a pound of zinc. At least that's what it's going to remove. I don't care about all that. I look at your whole rotation. And if you say, well, I plant corn this year and I plant soybeans the next year and then I'm back to corn again. Okay, well, how much zinc are you applying for your soybeans? And when I ask that question, I would say 99% of the time I get a blank stare. And finally, a farmer will say, well, I'm not putting any on my soybeans. I'm just doing it on the corn. If that's the case and you're in a crop rotation and you're only putting zinc on the corn, you're going backwards and your levels in your soil are gradually going down and down and down. And that's not good if you're shooting for high yields.
Now, most of the time, we and just about everybody else out there is using a little bit of liquid zinc with the planter, and that's fine. I'm not saying that's bad. But what I am saying here is, let's say you've got 100 parts per million or 80 parts per million of phosphorus, and you go, whoa, I'm really getting hurt because my zinc level's at 2. Yeah, you got to get that up to 8 or 10 now. So you can do it very inexpensively with zinc sulfate. Zinc sulfate is super cheap, and it's very easy to spread. Now, I don't usually suggest you mix it in with other fertilizers like urea or MAP or DAP, because what could potentially happen is it could settle out or it could rise to the top. It all depends on the formulation and what you're doing here, but where I'm going with this is either spread it all by itself on your farm and spread it using variable rate technology, or have it in a separate compartment. So, for example, if you have a fertilizer spreader that has 2 compartments or 3 compartments, use one of those for the zinc sulfate.
All right, Brian said a pretty high number there for parts per million zinc reading on a soil test, and you may be thinking, wait a minute, I'm at 2, and he's saying I need to go to 8 or 10 potentially if I've got high phosphorus levels out there. Yeah, that is what he said, and you're starting to run the numbers in your head. Man, that's going to cost me some money. Yep, it's going to be an investment out in your field. But again, how much are you actually removing each year with the crops you're growing? Not much, often less than a pound. So if you're putting out 10 pounds or 20 pounds or something like that, you've got enough for 10 years or 20 years or more. So that's a good thing. Now, as you're doing this, you may say, I don't know if I want to invest that much money across my whole farm. I totally agree with you. I would say start small. Maybe zinc isn't your yield limiting factor, and maybe we're just flat wrong. Maybe what's happened on our farm and other farmers that we've worked with isn't going to be the same for your soil. The best way to find out is take a small part of your farm and just try some different things. And maybe say, okay, I'll move up 1 part per million on most of the farm on this field, and then on another spot, I'm going to go up to whatever they say that I should be at. Maybe it's 4 parts, 8 parts per million, 10 parts per million, and just see what happens in a strip or 2. If you're wrong, what's going to happen? Well, you put too much zinc out and it's just going to take you some time. You're going to have to apply zinc there for quite a while, and you'll eventually draw it back out of the soil. If you put it across your whole farm and you don't know if this is your real problem, now you've spent a whole bunch of money, perhaps wastefully. So I don't recommend putting it on thousands of acres. Try a small amount first and learn.
Okay, and I do recommend putting it on thousands of acres. This is a proven thing if you are super low. Okay, so we're not saying, oh, everybody needs to be at 10 parts per million. Again, you really have to look at the phosphorus to zinc and maybe some other nutrient ratios in your field. But the important thing to understand here is zinc is very much like phosphorus in that they don't move in soil. So if you lay them on the soil surface and do no tillage at all, you do not place the zinc down or the phosphorus down, the zinc and phosphorus will not move down in the soil. Maybe after a decade they're down an inch. Okay, is that where you want these? No, get them down in the soil. So if you aren't going to do tillage, let's say you're a no-tiller or maybe a strip tiller, that's fine. I'm not saying there's anything bad with that, but now you have to place them down in the ground. Do not broadcast them out there, because otherwise it's going to be decades before you get them really down into the root zone at 4 to 8 inches deep where you would like them.
And that has been one of the nice things with the in-furrow or 2x2 applications. At least you're getting it down a little ways into the soil. The one downside that I've seen though is you've got to be fussy what form of zinc you're using. I really prefer zinc sulfate forms for safety compared to something like ammoniated zinc, and also for mixing with other things. It just mixes so much better. And then the last thing is for microbials. If you're putting microbials either on your seed or in your furrow, keep the zinc away from it unless you know it's a proven safer source like a zinc sulfate, for example.
Well, zinc is tremendously important to raising better yields on your farm, but so is weed control. Can you identify our weed of the week?
Downtime during spraying can lead to huge yield losses. Keep rolling with the Pentair Hypro Force Field. This pump features a unique self-regulated chamber that allows the pump to run dry while eliminating cracked seals, so you can spray longer and more reliably. Learn more at pentair.com/hypro.
Call it a day.
One more post.
One more bucket.
There's always one more to be done.
One more field.
To be earned. To be found. For us, it always has been. And always will be.
One more bushel.
As a global planter consultant, YieldTrack caught my attention because it eliminated so many of the agronomic compromises that growers face. YieldTrack is a partnership between Case IH and Norwood Sales, and since 2012, it has been the only planter designed around tracks, as opposed to trying to figure out how to mount tracks to a planter. The results are a stronger, faster, and lighter machine that gives uniform seed depth placement while carrying more fertilizer and seed at a 14 psi footprint or less, impacting yields 8 to 19 bushel per acre depending on the wetness of the planting season, with a greater response the wetter the spring. Contact Norwood Sales to learn more on using a YieldTrack planter to improve your farm's profitability.
Success isn't just about maintaining your operation, how you make out for the season, or how much you can get from each acre. It's about doing precisely what needs to be done to feed your crop and grow your legacy, all the way down to the last drop. AgroLiquid Precision Crop Nutrition. Apply less, expect more. Find a retailer at agroliquid.com.
What I look for in a seed isn't just in the seed.
It's people I trust who get me the solve without the sell.
Who show me where their seed fits, and even where it doesn't.
Because the only innovation that matters is the one I need.
With NK Seeds, progress means pushing my potential.
And success matters.
Back in the 1990s, we finally got BT corn. Oh, it was wonderful. All the corn being raised was what's now called conventional corn. We just called it corn then. And getting that BT protection for European corn borers was a huge game changer because it's so hard to time those applications. Now we've got traits like BT Double Pro that has a stack of BTs to try to prevent resistance. That's a great thing. And we really haven't had big problems with corn borer resistance. Now we're starting to add more BTs that can help with other bugs. So there's a newer trait called Tricepta that's out that also adds the Viptera protection. So you've got broad Lepidoptera protection, not just corn borer protection anymore out in cornfields. So you may say, okay, well, I could just plant conventional corn, or I could plant one of these BTs for above ground protection. How do I make that decision?
Well, how I always make decisions is one thing: economics. It's simple economics. How much more is it going to cost on a per acre basis, not per bag, because keep in mind, you're not planting a bag to the acre. And the lower your population, the lower the cost difference is going to be. So let's just say that my conventional corn is going to be $140 and my VT double is going to be $200. Well, it's $60. You go, whoa, $60, that's a lot of money. Okay, well, let's say it's 1/3 of a bag to the acre, just for easy figuring. Now you're talking $20, okay? And then you do the math. If let's say it's $3 corn, you got to have about 7 bushels difference there. All right, is it going to be worth 7 bushels to you to get that European corn borer protection? Is it going to be worth 7 bushels to get other insect protection? That's what you have to weigh out.
Well, you certainly do. And then the other thing is not just the cost of what insecticide is going to be. Because I talk to farmers all over who say, well, I can buy insecticide for just a few bucks anymore. That's not so bad. But think about the timing of when these bugs are going to come. And if you've got to hire a plane, all of a sudden now you're talking another $10 an acre just for the plane, not to mention the insecticide that you're going to use. And then here's the other thing. You've got to scout that field all through the season every week, watching for egg masses, because as soon as you see those egg masses pop up, you're going to have to be treating pretty quick before those bugs get into your plant. So if you're in an area that has above ground pest problems that are worms that are going to burrow into that stalk, I think you've got a great opportunity here for a good return on investment with the BT traits.
And then don't forget, you have Roundup tolerance. Being able to spray Roundup out there saves you a tremendous amount of money versus, let's say, Accent, for example, to rescue grass. And yes, even if Roundup doesn't kill all your broadleaves anymore, it certainly still kills some, and it absolutely kills all the grass that's out there. Now that Roundup's at its lowest price in history on a net basis, that's hard to pass up. And to me, that's worth another $5 to $10 an acre. So by the time I figure it, I only probably need to gain on average 2, 3, maybe 4 bushels because of that insecticide trait and the money that I'm spending. That, to me, it's worth it on our farm. But you have to make that decision on yours.
One of the things that may sway your decision is if you have our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?
The Weed of the Week is brought to you by Corteva Agriscience, Agriculture Division of Dow DuPont. Finish the fight against tough weeds with the Enlist Weed Control System.
Weeds are tough, but we're tougher. With unrivaled weed control, reduced drift, and near zero volatility. So, who's tough now?
Our weed of the week is Palmer pigweed.
Palmer pigweed is a very tough weed, and it's resistant to a number of different chemistries.
Be specific. Glyphosate, ALS, what else you got?
It depends on where you're at, because you may have PPO resistance. You certainly have Roundup and ALS resistance.
Maybe atrazine.
Now we're starting to see some that may be resistant to some trifluralin, Brian. We're seeing trifluralin work less, but I'll say this. Trifluralin isn't used at its full maximum rate, so it's never been great on pigweed. It's just been a helper.
It's been pretty darn good. Okay, here's the thing. You may have Palmer pigweed and you say, oh, there's nothing I can do about this. I can't stop this weed. Yes, you can. You absolutely can. It's just going to take some diligence. It's going to take some investment.
Let's talk about one of the toughest crops to stop it then, soybeans. Now, as we mentioned, there's a lot of resistance out there with Palmer pigweed, so use all the modes of action you can. Especially pre-emerge, you've got a bunch of different modes of action that could be used. In soybeans, we recommend starting with the 3-pre strategy, 3 different modes of action, including a PPO, like either Valor or Authority, a yellow, like trifluralin or pendimethalin, and also using some metribuzin.
Then post-emerge come in with either Warrant Ultra or Anthem Max. Either way, you're going to get another PPO and you're going to get a Group 15. So now you've already got 5 different chemistries out there, 4 different modes of action.
We definitely want to plant soybeans where you can spray Liberty over the top. That helps a lot because there's no resistance to Liberty yet. And we want to spray that Liberty timely so we don't have great big weeds that we're trying to kill. And then, of course, if you're using either Enlist or the new Extend Flex, you've got other herbicide options you can use too.
And then don't forget, there's also Cobra, there's Cadet that could be used again, there's Ultra Blazer. There are many options for Palmer pigweed. The biggest thing that we'll tell you, and I don't care what crop we're talking about here, is do everything you can to raise a great crop and choke that out. So it's easy in corn, it's easy in wheat, but in soybeans, if you're going wide rows, you might have an open canopy almost all year. So go to narrow rows if you're that worried about it in soybeans.
In corn, the biggest mistake I see is farmers aren't using high enough rates of residual herbicides. We need to use a full rate of our residual herbicides out there to try to get the longest residual possible.
Start with Verdict, follow post-emerge with an HPPD and Status if you need to. Use a little atrazine as well if you want. In wheat, I'd go to Sharpen Down and I'd follow post-emerge with Husky.
So don't give up. You can stop Palmer pigweed on your farm this year. That's all the time we have for this week's Weed, but Iron Talk is coming up next.
Find love, and then give it all away. Find love, then give it all away.
Success isn't just about maintaining your operation, how you make out for the season, or how much you can get from each acre. It's about doing precisely what needs to be done to feed your crop and grow your legacy, all the way down to the last drop. AgroLiquid Precision Crop Nutrition. Apply less. Expect more. Find a retailer at agroliquid.com.
Maintaining your crops is as important now as it's ever been. Howler, a revolutionary fungicide from AgBiome, can help. It provides long-lasting protection from a broad spectrum of foliar and soil diseases that affect crops. Howler is OMRI listed, has multiple modes of action, and has minimal pre-harvest and re-entry intervals. It's flexible, easy to use, and is available right now. Visit agbiome.com/howler to learn more.
How much does your crop residue cost you? Over time, residue accumulates in your fields, building excess carbon levels and tying up your plant-available nitrogen. Residue also traps P, K, and micros and can take years to naturally become available to your crops. This is because soil lacks the diverse microbial life needed to break it all down. With Decomp, you can naturally restore life to your soils and allow the release of valuable crop fertility. Learn more at heftyseed.com/naturals.
Who says harvest should be the only rewarding part of a season? Sure, ending a successful year of planning and planting is a very gratifying moment. But with the Bayer Plus Rewards program on your side, it doesn't have to be the only one. By helping you earn and redeem cash back on seed, herbicides, and other eligible products you use throughout the entire season, you can reap the benefits all year round. So contact your retailer to learn how to get more from your crops and put more in your wallet. Bayer Plus. Rewards are always in season.
Your soybeans are in the bin, but the game isn't over yet. Score more points this year by taking your beans to the end zone. If your beans went in the bin at low moisture, you can naturally rehydrate to reclaim lost yield with the End Zone fan control system from Farm Shop MFG. At $10 beans, every point of moisture below your target takes away 15 cents per bushel. That means raising 9% moisture beans to 13 can increase your profits by 60 cents per bushel. Score more yields in the End Zone from Farm Shop MFG.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whenever you want. In your life and on your farm, Case IH AFS Connect gives you more control. Monitor your operation, manage your fleet and your farm data your way. Case IH. Rethink productivity.
When you get a rainy day, this could be the perfect time to check the health of your engine coolant. I know, it's not that cold yet, but you're super busy and it'll creep up on you before you know it. I'll give you the steps to take and a few things to think about in today's Iron Talk. The first thing you need to do is visually inspect the coolant color and the coolant level in the overflow tank. If everything looks fine, you may just need to top off the coolant as needed. Check the freeze point with a refractometer and adjust as needed. Also, pH strips are a handy way to test your coolant condition at any point during the year. Testing for corrosion inhibitors is important too to extend the life of your equipment. If you need to change the coolant out, here's the best way to do it. First, drain the coolant and inspect all hoses and fittings. Then, flush with clean, preferably distilled water. Run your engine for about 15 minutes or so the clean water can flush through the system. Then, drain it again and properly dispose. Now you're ready to refill the cooling system with coolant. Run the engine once more to circulate the new coolant. 15 minutes should get the job done. Then, once the engine cools down, you can use the refractometer again to check and adjust the coolant system freeze point. One piece of advice my dad gave me when I was young still sticks with me today. I'd see him in the shop spending time going through everything on his equipment. When I'd ask why he was so fussy about it, he'd say this: well, there's a reason why some pieces of equipment and some operators have very few breakdowns or lost time. Proper maintenance is a must. That's why I'd advise you to do some simple maintenance and upkeep items right now before the weather gets too cold and before they're forgotten. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
That's it for today, but before we go, we'd encourage you to check out the Ag PhD radio show on SiriusXM channel 147 at 2 p.m. Central each weekday.
And don't forget to tune in to the next Ag PhD TV show. We'll have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.